Good afternoon, and welcome to your Daily Dose of Dudley. I know you're all excited. In honor of the Ghost of Christmas Present, I have changed into a green I don't own a green robe, and I certainly wasn't going to wear a green robe that was open in the front. So we'll honor it with my green champion sweatshirt. I'm sure you're all very excited. Anyway, we're going to finish off stave 3 today. I think it's going to be in 2 parts. Big focus. We're going to take a second. Besides paying attention to the way Scrooge is changing, because I think, for my money, he changes the most during this visit. But it's also the longest visit, so it makes sense. And remember, for today, though, I want you to pay attention a little bit to Bob Cratchit, because even though he's just kind of one of the side players of this story, he actually shows up in 4 out of the 5 chapters, so he's an important figure. Remember when we left off last, the ghost had found out that Scrooge had found out from the ghost Tiny Tim isn't going to make it till next Christmas if nothing changes, and that changes our theme of time, because now all of a sudden time is of the essence. Tiny Tim doesn't have time. The Ghost of Christmas Present and Christmas Present is sort of a fleeting thing anyway, but Tiny Tim's time is running out. And, as we read on, we're going to find out that time running out idea tends to rise up again. But for now, this is a thing with Scrooge. We're seeing a reaction. His words were used against him. He was embarrassed about it. So we're on page 49. "Man," said the ghost, "if man you be in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live and what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. O God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on that too much life among its hungry brothers in the dust." So the ghost kind of scolds Scrooge. Who are you to decide who lives and who dies? Going back to what he had said to the charity collectors. Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground, but he raised them speedily on hearing his own name. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob. "I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed," cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it." "My dear," said Bob, "the children. Christmas Day." "It should be Christmas Day, I'm sure," said she, "on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow." "My dear," was Bob's mild answer, "Christmas Day." "I'll drink his health for the sake of the days, for your sake and the sake of the days," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not for his. Long life to him. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt." So Scrooge is interrupted, feeling guilty, by hearing Bob Cratchit toast him to his family, to Mr. Scrooge, the founder of this feast, because Bob's basically acknowledging, like, well, we can have this without Mr. Scrooge. But his wife is angry. He doesn't pay Bob. He doesn't take care of him. He doesn't give him time off. He doesn't. And she's like, "Indeed." And Bob says, "Nope, it's Christmas. I'm toasting Mr. Scrooge." So you should really think about that when you're writing about Bob Cratchit. Who is this guy? He's toasting Scrooge. The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of the proceedings, which had no heartiness. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care 2 pence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for full 5 minutes. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before. From the mere relief of Scrooge, the baleful being done with, Bob Cratchit told them how he had a situation in his eye for Master Pete, which would bring in, if obtained, full 5 and 6 pence weekly. The 2 young Cratchits laughed tremendously at the idea of Peter's being a man of business, and Peter himself looked thoughtfully at the fire from between his collars, as if he were deliberating what particular investment he should favor when he comes to the receipt of the bewildering income. Martha, who was a poor apprentice at a milliner's, then told them what kind of work she had to do, and how many hours she worked at a stretch, and how she meant to lie Abe tomorrow morning for a good long rest, tomorrow being a holiday she passed at home. Also, how she had seen countless and Lord some days before, and how the Lord was much about as tall as Peter, at which Peter pulled up his collar so high that you could have seen his head if you had been there. All this time the chestnuts and the jug went round and by they had a song about a lost child traveling in the snow from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice and sang it very well indeed. There was nothing of high mark in this. They were not a handsome family, they were not well dressed, their shoes were far from being waterproof, their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded, and looked happier yet in the bright sprinkling of the Spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. Tiny Tim, that family, has caught Scrooge's eye a little bit. By this time it was getting dark and snowing pretty heavily, and as Scrooge and the Spirit went along the street, the brightness of the roaring fires in kitchens, parlors, and all sorts of rooms was wonderful. Here the flickering of the blaze showed preparations for a cozy dinner, with hot plates baking through and through before the fire, and deep red curtains ready to be drawn to shut out cold and darkness. There all the children of the house were running out into the snow to meet their married sisters, brothers, cousins, uncles, aunts, and be the first to greet them. Here again were shadows on the window blind of guests assembling, and there a group of handsome girls, all hooded and fur-booted and all chattering at once, tripped lightly off to some near neighbor's house, where woe upon the single man saw them enter, artful witches, well they knew it, in a glow. But if you had judged by the number of people on their way to friendly gatherings, you might have thought that no one was at home to give them welcome when they got there. Instead of every house expecting company and piling up its fires half chimney high, blessings on it, how the ghost exulted, how it bared its breadth of breast and opened its capacious palm and floated on outpouring with a generous hand, its bright and harmless mirth on everything within its reach. The very lamplighter who ran on before, dotting the dusky streets with specks of light, and who was dressed to spend the evening somewhere, laughed out loudly as the Spirit passed, though little kenned the lamp fire, and he had any company but Christmas. So more of just that, they're out. People are out. They're enjoying themselves. More of that contrast with Scrooge. And now, without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood upon a bleak and desert moor, where monstrous masses of rude stone were cast about, as though it were the burial place of giants, and water spread itself whoever it listed, or would have done so, but for the frost that held it prisoner, and nothing grew but moss and furze and coarse and rank grass. Down in the west the setting sun had left a streak of fiery red, which glared upon the desolation in an instant. Like a sullen eye, the frowning lower yet was lost in the thick gloom of darkest sky. "What place is this?" said Scrooge. "A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth," returned the Spirit. "But they know me. See?" A light shone from the window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced toward it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful company assembled around a glowing fire. An old man and woman, with their children and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. The old man, in a voice that seldom rose above the howling of the wind upon the barren waste, was singing them a Christmas song. It had been a very old song when he was a boy, and from time to time they all joined in the chorus. So surely as they raised their voices, the old man got quite blithe and loud, and so surely as they stopped, his vigor sank again. The Spirit did not tarry here, but bade Scrooge hold his robe, and passing on above the moor, sped, whither? Not to sea. To sea. To Scrooge's horror, looking back, he saw the last of land, a frightful range of rocks behind them, and his ears were deafened by the thundering of water as it rolled and roared and raged among the dreadful caverns it had worn, and fiercely tried to undermine the earth. So they briefly watched these miners and their families celebrating Christmas, and then the ghost takes him out to sea. And Scrooge is a little freaked out. He looks back, he can't see land anymore. Now it's just sea and these bad waves and bad weather. Built upon a dismal reef of sunken rocks, some league or so from shore, on which the waters chafed and dashed the wild year through, there stood a solitary lighthouse. Great heaps of seaweed clung to its base, and storm birds, born of the wind, one might suppose, as seaweed of the water, rose and fell about, if, like the waves, they skimmed. But even here, two men who watched the light had made a fire. Through the loophole in the thick stone wall shed out a ray of brightness on the awful sea. Joining their horny hands over the rough table at which they sat, they wished each other Merry Christmas in their can of grog, and one of them, the elder two, with his face all damaged and scarred with the hard weather as the figurehead of an old ship might be struck up to a sturdy song that was like a gale in itself. That's the top of page 52. We're going to stop there. We'll finish it in the next video. We don't want to keep them. We don't want to get these too long. But hopefully you were able to get some stuff there about Bob Cratchit and put together some ideas of what he's like. I'll see you here in just a few minutes on another Daily Dose of Dudley.